Allison Eyring, CEO of Organization Solutions and adjunct professor at NUS Business School. On this edition of Driving Growth, we meet Richard Yu, CEO of family-owned business Yu Yan Sang. Founded in 1879 in northern Malaysia, Yu Yan Sang today specializes in delivering traditional Chinese medicine in a modern context. Richard, thanks for being here today.
Thank you very much, Alison. It's great to be here.
Tell us what we should know about Yu Yan Sang.
I guess the roots of the business started in Malaysia with my great-grandfather. And it was started because he felt that his workers in the tin mine that he had were being addicted to opium. And he wanted to find a solution for their problems. Basically, they use opium perhaps as a means of healthcare to relieve pain. And they could not get out of a vicious cycle, of trying to earn enough money to repatriate back home, which is why they were there in the first place. So what he did was he imported medicinal herbs from China and set up a provision shop called Yan Sang.
And so your great-grandfather was clearly successful, the company grew, and your father inherited a very vast business.
Yeah.
Is that not correct?
My grandfather was the only son, so he inherited the tin mining and the Yu Yan Sang business. And so my grandfather took it to a much bigger scale, but he died at the outbreak of the Second World War, and leaving behind 13 sons and 11 daughters.
Now, when did you become involved with the company?
I got involved in 1989, end of 89, after having a career in basically financial services and computers.
Soon after you became involved in the business, you lost control of the company. Tell me about what happened.
Well, some uncles were not happy that I joined the business, and they engineered a sellout. So the uncles who were directors on the board, including my father, were not informed about what's going on. But because the family shareholding is quite fragmented, nobody had a controlling interest. So we were taken over by another public company. They were interested in us because of the listing that we had, rather than the business itself. And so the understanding was that if they ever wanted to sell the business, they would give me a first right of refusal on it. And that's what happened after 3 years.
You then took back control of the business. What happened?
When the then owners decided they want to sell the business, they offered it to me on the understanding that I would have a first refusal on it. And so I grouped together with a few cousins and we did a management buyout.
So how as a family business do you find a balance between being a family and being a company?
I think in the company, business has to come first. So we have to make decisions based on what's best for the company. But as a family, obviously, because we are the major shareholders of the business, I think we have to ensure that the business direction, strategy is aligned first before we actually bring it to the board of the company. Because we have independent directors on the board as well, and we have to make sure that the family members are in alignment before we discuss at board level.
Does it help or hinder to be publicly listed and to be a family-controlled business?
There's pros and cons to both. I think with a public listing, you have a profile, and it's probably easier to raise capital. And certainly, we do get very good support from local government, especially in Singapore, because they know who we are, and everything is a lot more transparent. The hindrance is that because of corporate governance, processes will take more time. And then, of course, we're subject to scrutiny by various regulators. But because we've actually been listed for quite a long time, going back to the original company, which is in the early 70s, in terms of the internal corporate governance, that's not an issue. And in fact, even if we were a privately held company today, I think we'd still have quite rigorous internal sort of processes as far as governance is concerned.
Now, traditionally in the Chinese family business, the daughters didn't have much of a place. Is that something that you see changing?
We are one of the few companies listed in Singapore that actually have a woman on the board. We've had a woman on the board since day one, since the day we were listed. And I made sure that we will always have a woman on the board because most of our customers are women. and a majority of our staff are also women. So I'm all for having representation by women on board. And there's no reason why we can't have more than one, you know.
Now you have 4 children.
Yes.
Do you encourage them to be a part of this business, or do you
Well,
encourage them to go and develop in other places?
having more than one child in the business can sometimes be difficult. You know, you don't want to have conflicts within the family because of differing views. When we took over the business, when the cousins bought the business out, we made it a point that we will not get the older generation involved. This issue of intergenerational conflict and so on could be quite serious, because each generation will probably want to do things its own way. So I think at the back of my mind always, you have to think about what's the best way to educate the next generation to enable them to take on the leadership roles. And not everyone is actually able or wants to do that. So there is, you know, it's a process.
So many large corporations struggle with succession planning with just 2 or 3 years in advance, and here you're thinking of the future of succession from generation to generation.
Yes. The difference with a family business is that you have to think beyond one generation. So if you want the business to continue, you've got to think, where are we going to be 20 years? What sort of skills do we need for leadership at that point in time? Is that skill available within the family? If not, we have to look for a professional manager. But how is the family going to continue to be involved in the business? Because I think the difference between a family-owned business and a sort of a public company that has no major ownership is that the family has a lot of input into the way in which the philosophy behind the business and how the business is to be run. And I think in a lot of public companies, the problem today is that there's a lot of short-termism. And unfortunately, a lot of the leaders of public companies think a lot about their own benefits first and not necessarily about what happens to the company over the next 20 or even 100 years.
Sounds like something that would be a constant tension.
Absolutely. In a way, it's good. It makes you think all the time about what you should be doing. You can't sacrifice everything just for long term, nor can you sacrifice the future for something that's immediate. Being over 100 years old, of course, we'd like to see the business continue for another 100 years. How do you do that? And how do you try and instill this kind of values in not just our own family members, but also in the whole management team, even the professional managers, to let them think about this long-term view.
Let's recap 3 key takeaways from Yu Yun Sang's growth as a family business. First, give priority to long-term interests of the firm by aligning interested family members on the direction and strategy for the business. Second, be cautious over potential conflict that might result from having too many generations involved in the business at the same time. Their interests may vary widely. And third, with that in mind, plan for the kind of skills the next generation will need to keep the family involved in developing the company. In part 2 of our interview, I'll ask Richard about the challenges of growing Yu Yun Sang beyond its core market and taking traditional Chinese medicine back to China itself.